Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. Once again, today we are going to look at the case of the Philpott family. We don't know much about Mick Philpott's early years of life. In fact, we don't even know the exact date he was born, although we know it was in the month of December of 1956 in Derbyshire, one of the 47 English counties located in the east of that country. What is known about Mick's life is very little. We don't know about his family or where he studied, but we do know that from a very young age, he showed an aggressive and violent personality, specifically with his partners, women, to whom he almost always was significantly older, who came from vulnerable situations, both emotionally and economically. Something that he obviously took advantage of to manipulate and abuse them. The first police record of such an episode occurred in 1978, when he was 22 years old. Since he had come of age a couple of years earlier, Mick had been serving in the English Army. However, that year he decided to leave it. But instead of applying for discharge, he simply grabbed his things and left without the corresponding permission. Mick knew they were going to look for him at his family's house, so instead of going there, he went to his girlfriend's house. Kim Hall, a 17-year-old girl, with whom he had already had quite violent behavior on several occasions. For example, he once shot her in the groin with a crossbow. On another occasion, he broke her knee with a hammer, because Kim was paying attention to the baby she was babysitting, and not to him. The worst, though, was what he did after deserting the army. Mick was an extremely violent man. He loved having power in the relationship, which led him to be controlling with his partners, in this case with Kim. Obviously, none of these things were shown publicly. Initially, Mick knew it wasn't as easy as starting a relationship and immediately mistreating his partner. His family and friends wouldn't allow it. So in those months they were together, this constant lack of respect towards her kept developing more and more. At first he was a gentleman, a very kind person, an ideal boyfriend. And then, from one day to the next, he started doing things like imposing a curfew so that Kim couldn't go out without his permission. If she didn't respect these kinds of rules, he would hit her. And like clockwork, after hitting her, he would tell her he was going to change. He would start crying, saying it wasn't his intention, also trying to make her feel guilty because she was forcing him to punish her. All of this developed gradually until Mick felt confident enough to torture her in front of others. Like the day in a bar, Kim said she didn't want to play pool, and this is what she describes happened. He hit me in the mouth with the pool cue in front of a bar full of men, and none of them did anything. He busted my mouth open, bleeding, made me sit down, and nobody said a word to him. The worst, however, was what he did when he escaped from the army. I tell you, not only was Mick violent, but he was also very jealous. And he would make up that his partner was cheating on him, that she was cheating on him with anyone who passed by. So he convinced himself that Kim was cheating on him, when in reality she just wanted to leave him. So, when he arrived at his girlfriend's house after leaving the army, he stabbed her a total of 27 times. All of this, it should be noted, he did while Kim's father was not at home. Because if he had been there, the story would have been different, as Mick was afraid of him. Kim's screams woke her mother, who hurried to her daughter's room to help her. However, he quickly overpowered her and, just like with her daughter, began to stab her, albeit fewer times. They ended up being 11. It was a neighbor who alerted the authorities after hearing both of their screams. When the paramedics arrived, Mick was seated, smoking, and told them not to bother coming in when he saw them pass by, because he had done a very good job. Basically, he thought at that moment that he had killed them both. He did not expect at all that they would survive and be able to tell what happened. Which, by the way, had they not survived, maybe Mick's sentence would have been much longer and he wouldn't have gotten out of jail to continue committing crimes. Luckily and incredibly, Both Kim and her mother survived this attack, for which Mick was charged and found guilty of attempted murder and serious bodily harm. I think the worst part of all this is that for attempted murder, he could have easily killed them. He was sentenced to 7 years in prison, but only served 3 and 2 months. It would later come to light that in reality, Kim had sent him a letter telling him she was going to leave him. And that's why he went to the trouble of going there to stab her, try to kill her, and also try to kill her mother. Anyway, he left. When he was released in 1986, he married Pamela Lomax, with whom he had his first 3 children, David, Richard, and Michaela. Later, Pamela stated that Mick was controlling and violent towards her. She said she even prayed for her husband to leave her for another woman, which only happened 10 years later when Mick met Heather Keogh, who was only 14 years old, always aiming to date younger girls. Mick left his wife to start a relationship with Heather, who at the age of 16 ran away from her father's house to move in with Philpott, who was then 37 years old. Together they had 2 children, Aiden and Mickey, who were not well received at all. In fact, Mick began to attack Heather, blaming her for giving him 2 sons when he wanted a daughter. It was the start of a violent, absurd, and endless cycle, with Heather as the only target. As their sons grew up, Mick taught the 2 boys to despise their mother and to be directly violent towards her. Despite this constant violence and disdain towards Heather, Mick hoped that the young woman would have more children with him, which never happened. Since he had never officially been discharged from the army, Philpott managed to get a new job there, which didn't last very long. In 1991, after assaulting a colleague in the head, he was finally discharged along with a probation sentence. So, up to this point, we have at least 2 serious incidents of violence, 2 or 3, depending on how you count them. But it was clear, it seems to me, that this person was not so fit to live with others. After 9 more years of abuse, in 2000, Heather left him, taking their 2 children with her. But that didn't seem to affect Mick in the slightest. Just a few months later, he started a relationship with Marie Duffy, a 19-year-old girl who had just come out of an abusive relationship in which her ex-partner had gone so far as to shave all her hair off so she wouldn't be attractive or go out with other men. When she met Mick, this girl of Irish origin was a single mother of a 3-year-old girl. Marie's life had been very complicated since childhood. She had been sexually abused in addition to being a victim of bullying at school. Perhaps this was what led her to accept the love, if it can be called that, and the good treatment that Mick offered her, and without thinking, in a matter of days she moved in with him. Mick's house was still from the army and was located on Victory Road in Derby. There they lived alone until 2001, when Mick met Lisa Willis, a 16-year-old orphan who, in addition to having no family to take care of her, had become a single mother. It was relatively recent. At a Christmas party that year, Mick invited her to move in with him and Mary, under the pretext that their house was more spacious. He had only met the girl a few weeks ago, but she had no one else and needed help with her son. So she readily accepted. By the beginning of 2002, Mick too had already established a romantic relationship with Lisa while still being with Maria, who lived with them. During that same year, and after a rather long legal process, Heather obtained legal custody and possession of her children on December 23rd, something that infuriated Mick and would mark him for the rest of his life. In fact, in the coming years, every December 23rd, he would violently destroy the Christmas tree. If this already seems unpleasant to you, incredibly it gets even worse. Remember, he should be in jail, but I think the justice system doesn't care much about that. In 2003, Mick married Lisa, who had just turned 18 years old. She served as maid of honor. She was still in a romantic relationship with Mick. In fact, she was pregnant with his child at the time of the wedding. They were basically then like a blended family. By 2006, he already had 7 children with them, 4 with Marie and 3 more with Lisa. And let's not forget about the ones he had before. It was that same year that England first became acquainted with the Philpott surname, when Mick began publicly demanding a larger council house for him and his family. At that time, there were a total of 11 people under the same roof in the Darby house. The city council denied Mick's request, explaining to him that the house he was living in was the largest in the locality, and therefore they were not going to be able to give him another one even bigger, which outraged him. Mick was so angry at that moment that he contacted the Birmingham Post to report what he thought was extremely unfair, saying, "Aren't they good enough? I love my country, but right now I feel ashamed of it. I think this country is going downhill." In the same note where he posted his statements, he let it be known that Mick and his family received a total of between £40,000 and £60,000 a year in social benefits from the state. When this became known, Mick and his lifestyle made headlines all over England, and several media outlets went to get his statements. In response to the criticism, the 40-year-old man claimed that those who spoke ill of him were just envious that he had two women at the same time. This public exposure had other consequences. For example, they received a visit from municipal officials who confirmed that Mick had not paid taxes for over 2 years. This put the house and all the state subsidies he was receiving at risk. While still in the midst of controversy, Lisa gave birth to her fourth child, and as soon as possible, she and Mary became pregnant again. While for the media, Mick presented himself as the patriarch of a happy family. In private, it was the complete opposite, being violent and abusive towards both women. During that same year, and somewhat to stir up controversy, at the beginning of 2007, Mick was invited to the Jeremy Kyle Show, a television program that consists of interviews with unique individuals such as Philpott was. During his appearance on the show, he defended his lifestyle and made statements such as that he would like to divorce Marie to marry Lisa, and repeat that process, so that none of them would feel left out of the family or that they were less important to him. In addition, he said he was going to have a vasectomy, something he never actually did, months later that year. It was one of the main cases presented by legislator Anna Whitcomb in her documentary Anna Whitcomb vs. The Benefit Culture, in which the Conservative minister spent a week living with Philpott and his family to truly demonstrate how they lived and how they depended 100% on the state. During that week, Whitcomb tried to convince Mick and his partners to change this lifestyle, and for that, she got the man 3 different jobs. Mick didn't show up to any of them and therefore was not considered. The former minister concluded that Philpott didn't care about anyone and exposed the abuses towards the 2 women who lived with him. Additionally, she said that none of the children seemed to have a loving relationship with him. Gradually, the population and the press began to forget about this man and this family. They continued living in the same conditions, while the family itself kept growing. By 2012, 3 adults, Mick, Lisa, and Maria, lived there along with 11 children. 5 were children of the marriage, a teenager who was Maria's son, a child only of Lisa, and 4 others that she shared with Mick. The violence was the same as always and had even escalated even more. For example, years before, in 2010, the police gave Mick a verbal warning when they were called because he was hitting Maria in the street. On another occasion, the neighbors saw him attacking her with a piece of wood. Fed up with this situation, in February of 2012, Lisa left with her children under the pretext of going swimming. In reality, she sought refuge at a shelter for women and children facing violence. After a few days there, she went to live with her sister and brother-in-law, not knowing that this would save her children's lives. And so, under this context, we move on to the day of the events. On May 11th, 2012 at 3:46 in the morning, one of the neighbors on Victory Road called the emergency service to alert about a fire at house number 18 on that street. By the time firefighters and police arrived, several neighbors had approached the house, attracted by the noises of broken glass and Mick's screams, who had started to break the windows of his home's greenhouse while shouting for his children, who were sleeping on the upper floor. While their parents were on the ground floor when the fire started, the firefighters promptly halted Mick's attempts to enter the house, taking control of the fire and searching for survivors. When they completely extinguished the flames, they were able to verify that 5 of the 6 children were already lifeless. They were Jaden, 5 years old, Jesse, 7, Jack, 8, John, 9, and finally John, 10. The only one who was still alive was Dwayne, the son that Marie had from a previous relationship. He was quickly given first aid and was rushed to the Birmingham Children's Hospital. As is common in this type of fire, both firefighters and police had to investigate the cause to determine whether it was intentional or not. While the necessary investigations were being carried out, Mick and Marie were accommodated in a room at the Premier Inn Hotel. Until the night of May 13th, Dwayne fought for his life in the hospital, but the injuries and aftermath of the fire were so severe that he couldn't overcome them. At the time of his death, both his mother and Mick were by his side. The next day, that is May 14th, the police released the results of the joint report with the firefighters. The two forces had confirmed that the fire was set intentionally. The investigation was able to prove that the fire originated from the entrance of the house, specifically from what was the letterbox where fuel was found. This led to a change in the case's classification and it became a homicide investigation. Taking this into account, the first ones to be interrogated were Maria and Mick, who repeated the story they told on the day of the events. They claimed that they were sleeping in the ground floor greenhouse when the fire started, so the investigators arranged for permission to put microphones in the hotel room they shared and listen to their conversations. The results of the children's autopsies arrived on May 15th. The youngest ones, who had died at the time, had done so from smoke inhalation, while Dwayne died as a result of an ischemic hypoxic injury caused by the combination of inhaling smoke and a cardiac arrest. The next day, Marie and Mick gave a press conference alongside the police. In this, they appear quite affected. However, many people began to notice that Mick actually had no tears, that he was crying, he was wiping away quote-unquote tears with the handkerchief, he was trying to dry his face, but that he actually had nothing more than a redness, perhaps even characteristic of his skin tone. The police authorities, for their part, were reporting on the new developments. Like the first fire had started under the hallway mailbox and that the accelerant had been gasoline. In the following days, the police conducted various inquiries on the house and the family's environment. They even went as far as to interrogate and arrest Lisa Willis and her brother-in-law Ian Cousins as possible suspects, but they were quickly ruled out. They had solid alibis for the night of the events, and they also had no clear motives for wanting to do something like that. The real breakthroughs in the investigation were made a few days later, when the recordings from the hidden microphones in the Philpott's room were reviewed. Thanks to these, they discovered that the couple was having some sort of polygamous relationship with a man named Paul Mosley, a friend of Mick's with whom they both had sexual relations. Paul could even be heard talking in the conversations and how the three of them were concocting the story together, in addition to several alibis for the night of the fire. In addition to this highly incriminating conversation, for example, you could hear how Paul was having relations with Marie, something that was later corroborated. It was a kind of manipulation that Mick had orchestrated so that his friend wouldn't say anything about the fire. The conversation that led to the arrest was the one that took place between the couple, when Mick asked the woman if she would stick to the story. And later he was heard saying, "It's my fault that half of the family is gone. I should have seen it coming." These recordings were supplemented by testimonies from the couple's environment, who assured that they were not as affected as they seemed. That, on the contrary, they said that both seemed to enjoy the constant attention they had and the attentions they had received. Finally, upon reviewing the clothes that Philpott was wearing that day, they discovered that it had fuel on it. In conjunction with the recordings, it was enough for the couple to be arrested on suspicion of murder on May 28th. On July 20th, Paul Mosley was arrested on bail as an accomplice. Although all three had initially been charged with first-degree murder, in December 2012 the charges were changed to manslaughter, as it was believed that they had not intended to actually murder their children, only the intention to burn the house. The trial began on February 12, 2013 and was held at the Nottingham Crown Court, lasting a total of 7 weeks. During the trial, the prosecution determined that Mick was violent towards both Maria and Lisa. He controlled the money that came into the house, even when it was deposited into both women's accounts. It was asserted that the trigger for the fire was Lisa leaving with her children, that Lisa had escaped with her children. It went against the entire system of control and abuse that Mick had generated over all those years, and that was unacceptable to him. According to prosecutor Richard Latham, the fire had been started by Philpott, his partner, and Paul Mosley as an attempt to portray himself as a heroic father. They hoped that this would guarantee him custody of the children he also had with Lisa, while they also intended to incriminate her for what had happened. A secondary motive was the house. They believed that the fire was a good way for the municipality to give them a better one. As for the plan, the prosecution showed how Philpott had started spreading rumors against Willis from the moment she left. The man told his acquaintances and friends that Lisa had threatened him and his family, and that she had also threatened to do something to the house. He said that Lisa wanted to throw firebombs at the place. It was a plan they had been putting together for several months. However, it was not necessarily a well-made plan. And as proof of this was how quickly the fire got out of hand. When the flames climbed up the polyvinyl chloride front door, melting the plastic, the fire began to advance, without the couple being able to do anything. It spread to the varnished wooden stairs, and since all the doors on the upper floor had been left open, the smoke had no problem entering the rooms and ending the lives of the children. Mick gave his statement at the trial. According to him, before the fire started, he had been playing pool with Paul Mosley until he left the house around 2 in the morning when he and his wife started watching a movie on television. Although they both fell asleep, waking up to the smoke alarm. When trying to figure out what was happening, they noticed the uncontrollable fire in the hallway spreading towards the stairs. She quickly called emergencies and handed the phone to Murray to try to climb to the second floor with a ladder in the backyard. However, according to him, the black smoke forced him to retreat and stay outside. Both he and the other 2 defendants pleaded not guilty to the charges they were accused of, but the evidence was very clear. On April 4, 2013, Mick Philpott was found guilty and was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 15 years in prison. His wife, Margaret Duffy, and Paul Mosley were sentenced to 17 years respectively, with the possibility of parole after serving more than half of the sentence in jail. After the verdict was announced, Mick made the sign of the cross and said it's not over yet. In November 2014, Marit was granted a divorce, and in 2020, she was released. Upon regaining her freedom, she lived in a shelter for a few weeks until she was granted an apartment as a subsidy. Paul Mosley regained freedom in May 2021, but returned to prison the following year for violating the terms of his parole. In 2023, after a meeting of the parole board, she was again granted this benefit in an oral hearing on her part, and finally Mick Philpott remains in Wakefield jail. So let's hope she doesn't get out. Thanks to CyberGhost Virtual Private Network for sponsoring this video. If you're looking for a virtual private network, the truth is, it's an excellent option at a super reasonable and affordable price. In the description of this video, you will find the link to the special offer from CyberGhost Virtual Private Network with 4 free months. So don't miss out on this opportunity. And that was the whole case for today. That's the story of the Philpott family, or of Mick Philpott. Tell me, did you know about this case? I say goodbye. So here are the Patreons and channel members. Thank you for supporting me through those means, and with nothing more to say. Here you have a new video. Here you have a recommended video. You can subscribe by clicking on my face, and see you in another video. Goodbye.